You were saying that one of the things you love about the Orthodox Church is the sense of mystery. I know that some people, when they hear mystery, they think they're just blowing smoke. You know, they're just they don't know what they're talking about. They just want it to sound kind of fancy and mysterious. But you mean an authentic mystery, something that God understands that we don't understand, for example.
Yeah,
Tell me about that.
it's not about taking a contradiction and cloaking it in mystery. That would be an evil.
Yes.
What I'm talking about is delighting in mystery, which is to say, for years on the Bible Answer Man broadcast, if people ask me about the Trinity, I can apprehend the Trinity. I can say to them, deriving my language from the Bible and the creeds, that I believe in one God revealed in three persons, eternally distinct.
Yes.
Now that's something I apprehend from Scripture, but it's certainly not something that I can fully comprehend. In fact, there's no illustration, there's no analogy, there's no metaphor that can completely and rightly capture that mystery. It's a mystery. It is a mystery. The incarnation. How can Christ be one person with two natures? That's a mystery.
And don't we accept mystery in other areas of our life? If we know a man and a woman fall in love with each other and their love is profound and it lasts a life long, we don't feel that we have to be able to explain what love is. We know that there's something beyond words there, and we can let that be a mystery that we love and we savor and embrace, but doesn't have to be something that we pin down in exact words.
Yeah, there's a sort of snarling logicality in the West, and I would say that Aristotelian logic, I mean, this has been part of my stick, as it were. I mean, it's the figuring it out, and there's a certain, you can just breathe and say, you know what, I don't have to in fact, this cannot be figured out. The Eucharist is the ultimate example of a mystery in line with the Incarnation and the Trinity. You know, in the Latin, it is often referred to as the mysterium tremendum et fascinans, meaning the mystery that causes us to tremble and yet it attracts us. So that mystery is beautiful. We don't have to say, well, there's a transubstantiating that is taking place. We don't have to talk about the elements and the accidents. We don't have to talk about in, with, and under. We can simply say, it's a great mystery. It's beyond anything that I can comprehend. But the universe itself is a miracle that involves mystery. I mean, how in the world can we account for so many things that happen in the universe? I, as the father of 12 children, I've seen many births.
Yes.
Even with grandchildren. And you can look at it in a clinical way, or you can look at it through different eyes, and you see the mystery of one human being coming out of another human being. So there's a certain beauty and relaxation, as it were, for me, in just being able to breathe deeply and say, you know, some of these things that I've tried to explain through clever words, clever anecdotes, I don't need to do that. I can live in the land of antinomy. I can live in the land of tension. How is it that I choose my path, and yet God directs my steps?
And yet I wonder if you went back in time, if you went back 30 years, you would probably be very startled if someone told you that you would end up becoming Orthodox. And there would be things about it that might even seem threatening. Perhaps even the amount of mystery would seem threatening. You would certainly be concerned about, do they believe in works righteousness and that we have to earn our own salvation? Do they worship icons? Do they worship the Virgin Mary? There would be many tough questions like that. How did that resolve for you? Was it a sense of you entered into the church and it felt right, and then you were gradually able to understand these difficult questions?
I mean, I talked about the Orthodox Church. I mean, I remember writing my first book, which was published in 1993, but I was writing it in the late 80s. I talked about the Orthodox view of theosis because I was contrasting that with the Word of Faith movement, with Mormonism, with cults that compromised the nature of God and had bad anthropology. So I spoke of Orthodoxy in a positive sense there. I've always, in terms of answering questions, talked about Orthodoxy being the church of the 7 ecumenical councils, the church that gave us the Nicene Creed, and so forth. But having said that, the Orthodox Church for me was largely shrouded in mystery. Mystery in the sense that I just didn't know. Mystery that I hear this, I hear that. And there are these little monikers that stick in your mind. So people will say to Orthodoxy is Catholic light. And that sticks in your mind and you're thinking, well, what does that mean? It means it's not large, as large. It's the second largest body of believers in the world, but it's not as large as Catholicism. Maybe they haven't perfected it quite like Catholicism has. There's all kinds of ideas that run through your mind. It's a dangerous moniker, and I think you can fall prey, and I think in some ways I fell prey to that as well. The danger I have found, you look at the core values of the Christian Research Institute, we talk about giving people answers, we talk about biblical and historical literacy, and we talk about countering cults and world religions. On the true side of the ledger, on the other side of the ledger, we talk about deification in the Eucharist and fusion, what it would mean if the body of Christ came together, not compromising the essentials, what C.S. Lewis talked about when he talked about mere Christianity. But to get back to the point is that for me, my problem was largely a problem of having memorized a lot of the Bible, but being largely historically illiterate.
Okay.
And I think this is an interesting thing for me in that Kathy and I have always been on 2 roads. I've been on the road of truth, and Kathy's been on the road of life. Now, this is a bit of an oversimplification, but the anecdote, I think, kind of works. So if you think about it, for me, everything is getting it right doctrinally. For Kathy, it is experiencing Christ. Our becoming Orthodox has been turbo boosting our memory, our marriage. Meaning that what happened in the process is that our roads converged, because all of a sudden I became interested in life and Kathy became interested in truth. I can't tell you the number of times that we sit across from one another in our bedroom in 2 chairs and we're reading. And Kathy is reading profound statements by Orthodox fathers or Eastern fathers.
Would not be her chosen reading before.
Yeah, it would not have been her bent, but now she's fascinating with the truth that was communicated through the community memory of the church. When I was chrismated, as you well know, you take on a name. I surprised a lot of people. I took on the name John Climacus.
Yes.
Now, for a lot of, meaning John of the Ladder, for a lot of people, they would think, wow, I thought you'd take maybe John the theologian, but not John Climacus. Why that name? He was a monk. He was writing to monks. But for me, I took on that name because I saw such nuggets of profundity in the early Christian church. It reminded me that I'm a pygmy standing on the shoulder of giants. One of my favorite quotes, by the way, favorite book, John Climacus, just to give people, Climacus is the way it's typically pronounced. He lived for 80 years. He died in 603. He was a monk to monks. And he wrote a book called The Ladder of Divine Ascent. It's like reading Proverbs, quite frankly, at times. There are 30 steps to the ladder. And it's all a matter of ordering your life around the divine. I mean, that at the end of the day is what it's about. But the wisdom in that book, one of the things that really cut me to the quick was something that he said. He said, and I'll paraphrase, he said, there are robbers that go out and they're going to rob, and they know God is watching them. They know God sees what they're doing, but they continue on their journey. And then they hear barking dogs. And when they hear the barking dogs, they turn away from the robbery. Meaning that here you have people who are afraid of dogs but not afraid of God. And I think about that so often. That truth has penetrated my heart such that I think, wow. There were times that I stood in that 3-year period before I joined and became a part of St. Nectarius. I was chrismated. There were times where I stood in that church, and I'm not proud to say this, but I had intentional sin in my mind. Not sin of the gross sense. I don't want anyone to speculate unduly here, but I knew I was going to do something that violated the principles of the kingdom. And I thought to myself, here I'm standing in church with premeditation, and I'm going to spit in the face of the Lord. And barking dogs may have turned me back from that, but I didn't have the fear of God. And I remember one time as I was preparing myself to take the Eucharist, I kneeled down and I started confessing using David's Psalm 51, yes. Have mercy on me, according to your unfailing love. And later on, restore to me the joy of your salvation, grant a willing spirit to sustain me, then I will teach transgressors your ways, and sinners will turn back to you. I remember as I was confessing my sins, kneeling before the Lord brought that to my mind, and I just came undone. Again, emblematic of the reality that there are no long periods of time between taking the Eucharist. Every week, you know what I do this week must be that which pleases the Lord, that which extends his kingdom, that I'm serving an audience of one. It's not about a popularity context such that I can sit back and say, you know what? If I join Orthodoxy, this might happen, this might happen. There's no calculation. Yeah. It is simply saying, Lord, I will follow wherever you lead, and let the chips fall where they may. Why? Because truth matters, but life matters more.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. And you took that great big step, and I guess you were prepared to some extent that there would be backlash. I gather that there was more of a backlash than you expected. And yet you don't regret taking the step and becoming Orthodox. You could have gone on just being a Sunday visitor for many more years, but
then I couldn't have partaken of the Eucharist.
Of the Eucharist. That's what made the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it is a total life change, isn't it? It seems like Orthodoxy touches almost every area of your life and brings this community to you, and you begin to eat the way they do, and eat the foods they do, and fast when they fast, pray when they say, saying the same prayers, not only during worship, but when you're at home. It takes you up into this community. And I think this touches on one of the things that troubles many, many Protestants, is that we believe that those who have died in the Lord are not dead, but they are alive in the Lord, and that they are in his presence, and they are worshiping, they're praying all the time, and that they are our fellow brothers and sisters, and we can ask them to pray for us. We can appeal to them. And just as you would ask your friend or your mother, anyone on earth, please pray for me. We can ask these heavenly friends, like St. John Climacus is to you. You can ask him to pray for you. That might have been a very disturbing idea to you, though, 10 years, 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think honestly, Frederica, it is a devaluing of the resurrection itself. The resurrection did something epic in human history. It parted the veil between this, if you will, and the netherworld. That veil, which is very, very thin, was now rent.
Yes.
And so there's a sense in which we can say that we fully embrace the community of the saints, those who are living here and those who are living there. There's no such thing as dead people.
That's true.
You're absent from the body. You're present with the Lord. You're being comforted in the presence of the Lord. And the notion, I mean, people, again, a misapprehension, people say, well, you're praying to a dead person. That's wrong. First of all, Orthodoxy does not tell you or teach you to pray to saints,
Right.
but it does adjure you to pray that the saints are praying for you.
Yes.
So we ask the saints that have gone on before. And I think there's a sense of accountability here. I mean, I haven't fully processed this. I'm sure a lot of my more erudite Orthodox friends have processed this in a way that I have not. But I think so often about Hebrews chapter 12, where Paul says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders, and let us throw off the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, looking unto Jesus Christ, the author and the perfecter of the faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinful men, so that you do not grow weary and lose heart. Now, what's the relevance of that? Well, the relevance of that to me is, in my mind, the very thought that my father, who died when he was 74, with fibrosis in the lungs, absent from the body, most certainly present with the Lord, that my dad could be interceding for me before the throne of God. That Saint Nectarius,
Yes.
a 20th century saint, could be interceding for me before the throne of God. That Theotokos could be interceding for me before the throne of God. But also, in doing that, it seems to me that they have to have some understanding of what's going on earth. Yeah. I've often said that when you die, you're not going to have less knowledge, you're going to have more knowledge. So I haven't figured all of this out, but let me say that from my perspective, even that causes me to want to live a life that is pleasing to the Lord, because there are a cloud of witnesses that are urging me on towards the finish line. And of course, the cloud of witnesses is seen in graphic fashion in Hebrews chapter 11, the great Faith Hall chapter.
Very favorite scriptures.
Yeah, but it's not only that. It is those that have been the martyrs, those who have lived selfless lives. I mean, we're not just talking about people that lived in the 2nd century or the 19th century. I remember when I came to faith in Christ, there was a man named Stanley Tam. I'll never forget him. He founded the U.S. Plastics Corporation, became a friend of mine, and he supported various things that I was involved in, and so I got to know him a little bit. He ended up, because of having this profound sense of ordering his life around the divine, he ended up taking his entire business. He wrote a book called God Owns My Business, and giving it to the Lord, which is to say that all of the profits of that corporation went to the work of the Lord.
Really?
And so he was now living his life not with mean earthly vanities in mind, but eternal verities. And I think you and I both can, I mean, I've sold millions of books. You're a best-selling author. You can get caught up in the celebrity of ministry, where you're successful, and now what it becomes is earthly. And I think the minute that it does, you've missed the point. One of the most haunting words of Scripture is Luke chapter 16, of a rich man. He's got linen and purple caressing his skin. He lives in luxury every single day, eats sumptuously. And then there's a beggar, Jesus says, lying by his gate, covered with sores, attended by dogs. And then there's this paradigm shift.
Yeah, and they both die.
They both die. Jesus tells a story with the angels carrying Lazarus to the bosom of Abraham, a metaphor for paradise or the presence of God. And the rich man, it says, found himself in torment. That quickly, one heartbeat, paradigm change. Those are haunting, haunting words, and they, in a graphic way, portray the reality that we are here to give the cup of cold water and the piece of bread in the name of the Lord. And so often I think, we're afraid, talking about the dogs, we're afraid of the secular press finding something in our life that they can capitalize on, but we're not afraid of God.
No, that's...
And we're going to stand before God and give an account for what we did. If we did this to the least of these, we did this under Christ. And getting back to Orthodoxy on this point, the disciplines themselves focus your mind like laser beams on the poor, because when you're fasting, you're not just feasting on God in some isolated way, but when you're fasting, you're inextricably woven together with another discipline, and that's almsgiving. So you're aware of the fact that fasting, as you said, being essentially a vegan diet, when you're fasting, you're forgoing rich and sumptuous foods. But why? You're also setting something apart to give to the poor. And in doing that, having the opportunity to give them the real bread of life, which is through your testimony of life, love, and lips, communicate the reality that we've given our life to.
I was thinking that when you quoted Hebrews 12, 1, 2 a little bit ago, I'd never really noticed that he says, since we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, let us run with perseverance. The connection there is that because we are embraced within the church, because we have brothers and sisters on heaven and in heaven and on earth praying for us, therefore, do your best. Therefore, reach out and strive to live a holy life. Strive to overcome sin in your life. It's not that we're trying to be good enough to be saved. We're already saved. God already did that. But if you love the Lord, you want to be full of His light, and you want to be transformed in Him. And there is a connection I'd never thought about before with being surrounded by the great cloud of witnesses. That they are with us, some ahead on the journey, some already in the presence of the kingdom, and some yet to come. But that eternal community continues everywhere. And it seems to me that it is a loss for those who don't really think about the saved who are in heaven and in prayer and in worship all the time. They miss out on something. I had a neighbor once, I was talking to her about, she was saying, why do you pray to the saints? And I was saying, well, we don't pray to the saints. We ask the saints to pray for us, just as I would ask you or someone else. And we talked for a while, and she said, well, I'm not convinced. I'm still, with my prayers, I'm still going to go straight to the Lord. And I said, well, if that's the way you want it, I won't pray for you anymore. Because there's really no difference between me praying for her or St. John Climacus praying for you. It's that all the boundaries are broken down. Yes. And in timelessness, we are embraced within that community of eternal worship, where we're going to, by God's grace, we will spend eternity. It's already going on. It's just waiting for us to join. And it is a joy to be running with perseverance the race that's set before us, getting a little stronger every day, getting a little healthier every day, better able to see the light of Christ, better able to bear the light of Christ to other people. This is the path that the Lord has called us on, and it's very exciting.
Yeah, it's not theoretical. It's not. It's not a theological construct. It is a life, right? It is a life, and it is a life that continues on for all eternity. I wrote a book called Afterlife, and I talked about three kinds of life. You have life in this life, as short as it is. I mean, the Lord, with great profundity, let us know that our lives are 70 years, if by reason of strength 80. And as I look through the obituaries, it's kind of interesting. You start looking, you kind of figure out, and maybe a morbid practice, but you start realizing, wow, I mean, that's pretty right on. I mean, some people die at 60,
Yes.
some people live to be 90, but on average, that's the human lifespan. It's very short. So we have life now, and what we do now counts for all eternity. But then we have life after life, which means absent from the body, present with the Lord. But what do we look forward to? We look forward to life after life after life, meaning that there's going to be a time when Jesus appears a second time.
Yes, yes.
It doesn't necessarily say, if you read Hebrews, that he's coming from somewhere, but he appears a second time. And when he does, this universe that groans in travail will be liberated from its bondage to decay. And we ourselves, this body has tumors in it.
Yeah.
Tumors in my neck, tumors in my chest, tumors in my lungs, tumors in my pelvis, tumors in my stomach. This body has now tumors in it. Hopefully eradicated by the treatments. But this body is an imperfect body. It's corruptible. It's mortal. It's perishable. But when Jesus appears a second time, all of that changes. The non-physical aspect of my humanity will then be united again with an immortal, imperishable, incorruptible body. And then we will be what we were intended to be. We will be fully those who are actualized in theosis, in union with God, as we learn and grow and develop and forever explore not only the majesty of God's created handiwork. I mean, we talked about this before. Maybe this is a point we need to make really parenthetically quickly. This Christian faith that we're talking about is not Platonic. It's physical. We believe in the physical resurrection of the dead. We believe that we will rise. When you gave birth, you gave birth to a body-soul unity.
Yes.
And that's what we're going to be for all eternity. We're going to be body-soul unities. We're not going to be non-physical beings living in some ethereal world. We're going to be real human beings living in a real physical universe. What that means, we don't know exactly. But what we do know is that it will be a real physical identity. And I think going back to Orthodoxy, this is some of the beauty that you see. Why is it that there are bones in ossuaries, in churches, in altars? Why is that? Well, I think it is a testimony to the fact that we believe in the physical resurrection of the dead. If we would have been in the tomb when Christ rose from the dead, we would have seen dust fly off the very slab on which he lay. Christ rose physical, and the same way we will.
And Christ is physical even now, that at his ascension, he took his resurrection body into heaven. It's impossible for us to know what a resurrection body is, but we know that it is three-dimensional, it is physical, it is a body in which he was able to eat fish. That, and that if heaven was entirely spiritual before, now the physical human body has entered heaven. And as St. Paul says, we don't know what it's going to be. It's like a seed falls into the ground, an acorn, and then you get an oak tree. And you could study that acorn a long time and never envision an oak tree if you didn't know. We can't imagine what our bodies are going to be like, but God knows. And that will be our eternity. That it's not, we die and we shed these nasty bodies and we flap around like spirits for all eternity. The matter of this earth is good, that it all exists in God and by God's grace. And he said it is very good. And it will be very good for all eternity in some mysterious way we can't begin to grasp.
Sometimes I use the analogy of a caterpillar becoming a butterfly. It's kind of an instructive analogy because the caterpillar, sort of an eating machine, and crawls around on a twig or on the ground. And then it sows the seeds of its own demise.
Yes,
It
goes into the shroud.
Into the shroud, into the chrysalis. And there its constituent parts devolve into a mysterious molecular mixture. Out of that comes a butterfly. Now, what's important to notice is that the caterpillar and the butterfly are the same physically, but they're different organizationally.
Yes.
So you have the caterpillar that has eyes that can distinguish between light and dark. You have the butterfly that has a field of vision and color acuity that exceeds even that of a human being. You have the caterpillar that can crawl, the butterfly that can fly. You have the caterpillar that eats in a particular way. You have the butterfly that has a proboscis that can indulge in the nectar of life. So again, we see metamorphosis is going to take place, but even that is a faint analogy of what it will be. And the early Christians knew about resurrection. I mean, you think about scared, scattered disciples. Jesus had been crucified, and they were scared and scattered, and then Jesus appeared to them. And they became lions of the faith.
Yes.
And now it wasn't about, well, if I get chrismated, what's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to my ministry?
Yeah.
No, they were no longer scared and scattered. They had seen Christ die. They had seen Christ rise. They had ate with him. They had touched him. They had handled him. And they knew that no one could kill them. They knew that you can kill the body, but I will continue on. And so they no longer were afraid of the tyrant's brandished steel or the lion's gory mane, the fires of 1,000 deaths. They lived with eternity in mind. You think about one of the early Orthodox Christians, Polycarp.
Yes. Yeah.
He's facing his own martyrdom.
An old man.
An old man, 86. 86 years, he says, I served him.
Burn him to death.
And they burn him to death, and yet he is willing to be burned to death rather than denying his Lord. Why? Because he had taken up his cross to daily follow Christ. You said something to me yesterday, and I think that this interview, this time together would be incomplete without it. And that is, as Orthodox Christians, we make the sign of the cross. And in many ways, I remember sitting in the Orthodox Church for the years that I did not become chrismated, with the Western word confirmation, for people to get some kind of an idea of what that word means. But I remember seeing this, and it was so awkward for me. It took the longest time for me to be able to do this. And now it is a habit, a wonderful habit in my life. But it's not a habit in the sense of a routine, something that I just do without any thought.
Brushing teeth.
Yeah, it's something that has transcendent meaning, because what I am saying, in essence, is I am not ashamed of Jesus Christ. I have taken up my cross. I'm daily following him. You were explaining to me the other day that even in that portion of it, you bend and you take up your cross. Yeah. And the beauty of that is that we are saying to the world, you don't identify me with a mark on my forehead. I'm already marked. What I do in my worldview identifies me as a follower of the Lamb, not a follower of the Prince of Darkness. I love what you said the other day. I'm stealing all your lines here.
Please do.
I love what you said to me the other day. I mean, let's see if I can say what you said, but you said something to the effect that, I forget the first part of it, but the difference between standing at a fair and seeing either sheep or goats.
Oh, yes. Yeah, yeah. The final judgment, he divides the sheep from the goats.
And the first part of it was?
And I said, the last judgment apparently is not going to be like a judge judging a criminal trial. It's like a judge judging a livestock fair.
Yes, yes, because you've already identified yourself as to whom you belong to.
You spend your lifetime becoming a sheep or becoming a goat. It is every little choice you make as you go through. And at the end of the time, it's not going to take Jesus very long to look at you and see which one you became. And we go into eternity that if we have loved the light, then the unveiled light of God will be joy and illumination and warmth to us. And if we love darkness rather than light, and we continually try to escape the light, then the light is going to be burning and misery and paradoxical darkness. So we choose for ourselves. And this was a new idea to me as an Orthodox Christian. I'd always pictured God like adding up your sins and then weighing, Jesus, but then you went back on your faith and you backslid. It was just so complicated. But it was like he's going to decide which way you go. And to understand that in the Orthodox view, it is that God is life and light and blazing energy. And we either acclimate ourselves to him and love him and yearn to be with him, or we will find that we cannot bear it. But it is still his love. His love is not a sentiment. It's not an emotion. His love is the power and the energy of the universe, the creation of the universe. Every atom of matter is filled with the power of his love. And if we try to resist that love or think we can spurn it, it will burn us for eternity. It is our choice whether we go to that veil and step through the end of our lives, whether we go through rejoicing and embracing the light or trying hopelessly, futilely to flee from it.
Yeah, God doesn't force himself on us. It's one of the great mysteries. God created humanity in such a way that we could choose to love him or choose to do otherwise. And the same thing is true for all eternity. God does not take people and drag them kicking and screaming into his loving presence. Otherwise, heaven wouldn't be heaven, heaven would be hell. The righteous would inherit a counterfeit heaven, and the unrighteous would be incarcerated in heaven against their will, which would be a torment worse than hell. Those who want to be friends of God, participants in the kingdom, God does not throw obstacles in their path. He leads them gently along. But those who do not want his love and his grace and his goodness, God gives them what they want. And that is separation from his goodness, glory, and grace.
I don't remember if it's C.S. Lewis or who it is that says that the world is divided into two kinds of people. The one that says to God, your will be done, and one that
Lewis,
God says to them eventually, all right, your will be done.
Yes.
You have your way.
I remember before Christopher Hitchens died, my daughter Christina and I were having a conversation with him, and my daughter, having the chutzpah of youth, was trying to debate the great Christopher Hitchens, which he was a brilliant guy. He was he was very historically knowledgeable. He was literarily knowledgeable. He had a fairly good handle on his version of theology. But she was sort of in the hubris of youth. She was trying to debate him a little bit. But what I remember most from that conversation is that Christopher Hitchens said, if anybody says that I became a Christian on my deathbed, don't believe them. There's no deathbed conversion for me. I didn't want God in this life, and I don't want him in the next. And that is the reality in the lives of so many. they don't want the very thing they need. They don't want a relationship with God. And on the other hand, it is the great opportunity that we have, whether we're a Christian in the Roman Catholic Church, or a Christian in the Southern Baptist denomination, or a Christian in the Orthodox faith. We are beggars that have found water, and we're called to share that water of life with the world. And I think, perhaps to my Orthodox friends, I would like to say, let us not just revel in what we have been given, but let us take what we have been given and give it to the world. We can become so self-satisfied with our own liturgy, with even our own asceticism and practices, and forget that there's a world out there that needs the gospel, a world that needs Jesus Christ. And the normative way in which that gospel goes out to the world is through other human beings. God can do it supernaturally. You and I talked about the visions and dreams that Muslims have in coming to faith in Christ. God can reach people in non-normative ways. But the normative way in which God reaches people is through the gospel. Now, I've never advocated running around madly grabbing people by the lapels and saying, "Brother, are you saved?" I think that's counterproductive. In fact, I've always said it's not evangelism. It's equipping for evangelism. If God's people will prepare themselves, as you have done in a lifetime, out of the overflow of that preparation, you can reach people. When you're sitting on a plane and you're wanting to sleep because you've been speaking, I know it's happened to me many times, and then someone starts asking you a question, you got to brush them off because I won't say you did this. I've done this. I know. You know, I just want to sleep. I'm tired. And so I give them one-word answers and hope they're not going to ask me another question. And eventually they ask me enough questions and we get in a conversation. And by the time the plane has landed, I realize, wow, God has set me next to someone that he has thoroughly equipped me to answer his questions. Yes. I can't say that all these people become followers of Christ, but I can say that I sowed a seed because I was equipped. And I think we have to have that mind, that eye that sees the needs of the world, that recognizes that the world is in a mess, not because pagans are exercising their job description. What else would they do? Right. It's because Christians all too often are not exercising their job description, and that is being ambassadors for the King of Kings, Lord of Lords.
Yes, we've neglected that so often. And it's hard to know how to do it, that we live in a culture that has had, basically everybody gets inoculated against Christianity when you're a child. And you have a little toddler-sized idea of what Christian faith is. And you grow up and then you think, wow, Buddhism, that's so profound. The other religions look very deep. And we have these very shallow ideas of Christianity. So it is hard. It is hard to show Christian faith or the Orthodox faith to non-believers or to believers whose faith is very shallow. There are certainly many things about Orthodoxy that seem daunting and strange from the outside. And the rationale for it is we're joining an ancient community. And this has been preserved in every culture throughout every century. It's not something that has a particular rubber stamp you have to be in. It fits all people everywhere, and we see the results. We see the transformation happen. It is a more organic, and it's more direct, as we were saying. It's not like in theory and you get a certificate. It's like you exercise, you get stronger. It's automatic, it's organic like that. It's very hard to know how to present this in a world that misunderstands and has a lot of preconceptions that are not accurate.
Yeah, and I think too, Frederica, I feel compelled to say to everyone watching that it's easy to paint Orthodoxy as a panacea, as though Orthodoxy has it all together, and then you contrast and compare. It's unfair because Orthodoxy is not a panacea. Orthodoxy has its own issues.
It does,
Because
certainly.
the reason is not orthodoxy. The reason is not the teachings of the church. The reason is the fault line runs directly through the human heart. And I think as we're talking about all of these things, we're recognizing that we're imperfect people living in an imperfect world. You can have a scandal in the Orthodox Church just as you can in the Catholic Church, just as you can in a megachurch. Again, because the fault line runs through the human heart. So what is Orthodoxy teaching us? It's teaching us a way in which we can be in the spiritual gymnasium which transforms us from weak and witless to people who have a robust faith. And that faith then becomes intoxicating to the world.
That's the goal, isn't it? It's the fire of your faith that other people, not explaining things in theories and propositions, although they're genuine questions that should be answered. But it really is the experience of the presence of God and being filled with that presence. And what Orthodoxy is the gymnasium, as you say, or the hospital. People often say it's a hospital for sinners, not a hotel for saints. And I like to draw that analogy to the hospital out a little bit more because I don't want people to think I'm making a claim that the Orthodox Church is perfect or that every clergyman is perfect. It's as if you have this hospital where very skilled surgeons are drawing on 2,000 years of knowledge, of trial and error experience of knowing how to heal the soul, and they know how to do it very well. And I would say Orthodoxy has really perfected this knowledge of how to go about this healing. I invite everyone into this to take part in it as much as they're able. Hopefully the whole package, because then you get all the different parts. But every hospital also has to have an administrative board. These people may not be people of medicine at all. They might be very wise businessmen. And they might be corrupt, and they might make bad decisions, and they might be tempted by power or tempted by the great wealth at their command. It's always possible for Orthodox people to be tempted and to fall. We're not saying that we're never tempted, we never fail. We're not saying that it's an unimpeachable and utterly infallible, headship of the Orthodox Church, because we're all fallible. But we're saying that even if the leaders of the church turned out to be very, very compromised, that still wouldn't affect the medical knowledge. The medical knowledge, the spiritual knowledge of how to be healed is still retained and practiced intact in Orthodoxy, even if the whole board of the hospital has to be kicked out and you got a new board.
I love that. I really love that. I mean, it's one of the things I gathered through experiencing Orthodoxy at St. Nectarius is I learned over time that the Orthodox are not innovators.
That's very true.
They're trying to perpetuate to the best of their ability the Judeo-Christian tradition.
What they found works. Yeah, that's
and so they're going back in history and saying, okay, this is the community memory that is passed on. This is how they celebrated the agape meal. This is how they celebrated the Eucharist. This is how they practice the spiritual disciplines. And this is how almsgiving comes in. You can look at the Didache, for example, and you have this continuum. There are people, however, and I've heard this objection many, many times, that say, well, there was a great apostasy that took place in the church, and therefore the faith was not passed on. The authentic faith was not passed on from Jesus to the apostles to Ignatius of Antioch or Polycarp or, go through a litany of the church fathers. There was a great gap, a great time in which as it were, the gates of hell
Yes.
prevailed against the church.
Why would God do that? He stopped loving his people? It doesn't make any sense. I'm sorry I'm interrupting
Yeah,
you.
no, these are the kinds of objections that you hear, and I think it's probably good for us to know how to answer those
Yes.
objections. I mean, it's the typical conspiracy theory about Constantine, and all of a sudden he becomes the person that puts together the Bible in 325 AD at the Council of Nicaea, when that was not even in view. It had to do with the two natures of Christ primarily. So there's a lot of misinformation, and I think that going back and studying church history would do us all a great deal of good, to see how we got from the time of Christ, 2,000 years later, to the present moment. To get some of that in your head, I think dispels a lot of the mythology and helps you think more clearly about these things.
That's true. There is so much misinformation, in particular about history. And I think that leads me to a final question I wanted to ask you, which is that you're ahead of the game because you actually attended an Orthodox church for 3 years before you joined. And you did a lot of research and a lot of reading, and you continue to do that. Many people who become Orthodox, sometimes it's like the honeymoon and they're delighted and everything seems wonderful. And then they start into it and they think, well, this is harder than I thought, and things take them aback they weren't familiar with. Many people find that as they spend more time in Orthodoxy, facets of it open up to them they didn't see before. There is this there's a strange thing that I've never found a way to put into words, but that I went into it with a very intellectual idea of the changes I was making, and then found in Orthodoxy that there's like a whole intermediate intellectual piece that is not necessary, and that it's organic and immediate, and that you receive communion and now the divine energies are within you. There's a whole extra gap of building a bridge of words that isn't necessary. And that's strange, that's hard to grasp, that it's a different kind of knowledge. It's a different path of humility and yieldedness and of being a child in the family and knowing there's so much you don't know and that you will learn like a child. Well, because you've been the Bible Answer Man, or been the host of the Bible Answer Man for so very long, people are going to phone you and ask you questions about Orthodoxy, and you're 3 years in, but you probably have another 4 or 5 or 8 years in before you've grasped the whole thing. How do you handle that? If you have a question that you don't know how to answer yet. I know you have staff that helps you with your research, you have books to draw on, you're probably very equipped, but I just would say a word about how you deal with the things you don't know yet.
Yeah, I think meekness and reverence is, I mean, we're always to be ready to give an answer, a reason for the hope that lies within us, with meekness and humility, reverence and respect. And what that means is that I have to realize that I'm in a treasure chest. I can't find the bottom to number one, but I realize that there's so much I have to learn. I've been a lifelong learner, but there's a tremendous amount that I have to learn. And every now and then, Father Steve Dolber at St. Nectarius corrects something that I say. And it's very, very helpful to me. That's how you learn. You think about...
Is what I've found in talking to you is that you never fight. You're always, oh, I didn't know that, and you're so willing to understand things that you don't instinctively understand. You're very open to being taught by Orthodox.
Well, that's right, and I think it's maybe the best analogy that comes to mind for me is eschatology. I remember for the first 15 years I did the Bible Answer Man broadcast, people would ask me questions about eschatology. And I would say, well, here's the various, but we want to know what you think. And I had to say, you know what? I'm not qualified to give you an opinion. And so it took many, many years memorizing the book of Revelation, studying the paradigms, immersing myself in Scripture before I wrote a book called The Apocalypse Code. Find out what the Bible really says about the end times and why it matters today. So it took a long time for me to be able to wade into those waters. And I think that says something. What it says is that we should not presume to be teachers unless we have learned. And James says, let not many of you be teachers, because with teaching there comes a stricter judgment. And that's analogous to how I feel about Orthodoxy today. I feel very much like a grasshopper on the landscape of Orthodoxy. I've been at it for, in terms of studying theosis, I've been at it for maybe 10 years. In terms of the broader purview of Orthodoxy, I've been at it for 3 to 5 years. I can't presume to know what you know. And so I think there comes that time where you have to put your ego in the trash basket and you have to humbly say, you know, that's a great question. I haven't thought that through. But the question itself is a blessing because the question allows me to do some further work, to take things that even now seem strange to me in Orthodoxy. There are still things in Orthodoxy that I have a hard time getting my head around.
No, just with
It doesn't mean I won't get my head around it. It's just that I haven't got my head around it yet. But it's interesting to me that as I've pursued this, as I've asked the questions, I've gotten very, very helpful answers to my questions that are satisfying to my soul. And so I am on a path that I will never turn back from. I'm on a path of ordering my life around the divine, which is the moniker I hope sticks in everybody's mind, because I think that's the quintessential phrase. It is ordering your life around the divine. And I'm learning to do that within a spiritual gymnasium, and I'm being helped along by my friends. There are books like yours, Welcome to the Orthodox Church, which gives you a primer on Eastern Christianity, and it does it in a very accessible way. Every single week I read through a little bit more, going through and through John Climacus.
Oh, yes, yes.
You know, to get those nuggets of truth. So I'm on a journey. I haven't arrived, and I will never arrive. You know, the one thing, Frederica, that you learn doing the Bible Answer Man broadcast as host is the more you know, the more you realize how little you know in the scope of what could be known. So I'm deeply grateful for the patience of my Orthodox peers that know a whole lot more than I do, and that I'm privileged to learn from. And I'm also grateful for many of my friends within the evangelical community, particularly when I was diagnosed with cancer. How many of them called me and said, we're praying for you? And didn't just say it once, but circled back and said, please know we're praying for you. Our congregations are praying for you. So I'm deeply grateful for God's people wherever he has them.
Yes, yes. And their prayers sustain us all. And now we have, now we're aware of the prayers of all the saints, known and unknown, throughout history.
Amen. I could not endure my particular trial without the prayers of the saints, and I'm almost embarrassed with the attention that I've gotten. There are many people suffering a whole lot more than I am, but I intend to take people through my journey, not to point to myself, but to point to God, to underscore the fact that he is ever faithful.
Thanks be to God. We'll be with you every step of the way.
Thanks, Frederica.